people to complete the poll if they haven't already, and then we're going to end it. I wanted to use the poll just to get a sense of the experience level and perspectives and roles of the different attendees. So I'll give you just about 15 seconds. If you haven't already answered the poll, it shouldn't take long. And hopefully there's a choice for everybody. I did notice we have a lot of academics on the call, and I hadn't really created a category for that. So I apologize. I guess you'll have to go with either, I guess you'd have to go with other. So with that,
we have here 36 out of 62 people.
Sure.
And out of 66 people, that's 58% participation in this.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. I don't know if you can see the result, but I can certainly give you the information there.
Yep. I can see it. So we've got the leading category, I guess, is other with 28%, manager and leader with 19%, and then project managers of different levels of experience at 17%. So junior project managers, senior project managers, and a program manager. Welcome. And it looks like that's everybody. So awesome. Thank you. Thanks for creating the poll. I appreciate that. All right, so hopefully that will not be on your screen. It's not on my screen now. Let's dive in. So I wanted to start with just quickly, I know that was a very long introduction of my expertise, but I think the main thing that I want to highlight from my background is that my purpose is to help reduce pain and sufferings in teams and organizations. And I do that through training, coaching, speaking like this, and writing. The experience that I had is primarily in the IT project and program management arena. I started my career a long time ago, 1985. I worked with IBM and Unisys as an IT project and program manager. And I had an experience in 2010 where I began to learn about agile ways of working and really develop expertise and became something of an evangelist in terms of agile ways of working. And I've gotten to the point where I prefer it, and I really want to help people understand and apply those ways effectively. And I've had the privilege of working with a lot of great large and small organizations and helping them with their agile journey. So I also, as Jacques mentioned, I also teach at Northwestern University in the School of Professional Studies, where I created and I lead the certificate in agile practices. Last year, we also launched a new class in their master's program in information systems that was very well received. And I guess when I got the invite to speak, I kind of thought of, well, let's see, we've got Northwestern University and Northeastern University. Between these two, I probably should have covered the whole United States in terms of, mastering it with agile content. But the reality is, and probably most of you already know this, Northwestern University is located in Chicago, Illinois. So the best that I can do is dominate, a small chunk of the northern part of the country here. So why am I here? I want to provide some clarity on when and why to choose agile approaches over traditional approaches. But second, and probably just as important, is to encourage approaches that make project management relevant to fostering innovation in organizations. And it's going to be more apparent why I think that innovation is really important, or an important piece of the puzzle as we move forward here. So a quick outline of what I'll talk about. We'll talk about what is Agile and why do organizations use it. Why is it important that you choose an approach that's effective for your context? We'll talk about some of the decision tools for choosing that most people consider. We'll also look at a new model, relatively new, looking at work as either exploit or explore. And I'm going to provide a cautionary tale about avoiding half measures. Now, in terms of agile ways of working, Adam Sandman spoke earlier today, and he did a really good job of introducing Agile. So for those of you who saw that presentation, I won't repeat what he said, but it was a great intro for the kind of talk that I'm going to give today. So what is Agile and why do companies pursue Agile ways of working? Let's start with a very simple definition here from the dictionary. What is Agile? Well, Agile is an adjective, and it means marked by ready ability to move with quick, easy grace. So I really think those two parts are important, the ready ability to move and quick, easy grace. Many people confuse Agile with other things, but I think those kind of sum it up, our ability to move and to do it gracefully and easily, quickly. Most of you are probably familiar, or at least I hope you're familiar with the Agile Manifesto, which was created in 2001 by a group of 17 thought leaders in software development. The 4 Agile values are probably the most well-known part of the Agile Manifesto. But what I really feel are more important or more valuable are the 12 principles behind the manifesto. And those are somewhat summarized here on the screen. This is where the rubber hits the road. So the Agile values are really at a very high level, but the Agile principles are things that organizations should be considering and living by if they're trying to be Agile. And some of my favorite ones here, deliver frequently. So we're delivering frequently or continuously, as Adam said earlier, and that allows us to get feedback, to be able to change direction, to know whether we're hitting the customer's needs or not. Also, welcome changing requirements. When I first took project management training back in the 1990s, I learned the best way to manage change was just say no. But unfortunately, that doesn't really work. We work in a context where things change all the time, and we don't really have the ability to say no. We've got to set up our processes so that we can accept, embrace change. I think a couple of the other ones that I like are self-organizing teams and empowering and trusting the team. But the single most important Agile principle is to satisfy the customer. So that's really at the heart of all of agility, is satisfying the customer. And these are all the principles that lead toward that overarching goal. Now, it's interesting, many organizations, or some organizations, I shouldn't say many, they want to pick and choose, treat these 12 principles as a la carte. And I actually had a corporate client, a very large Fortune 100 well-known organization here in Chicago, that when they hired me, they said, well, we could live with 9 of these Agile principles, but not 3. And I was dumbstruck at first, and then I was puzzled. I'm like, well, which 3 principles aren't you going to live with? And I don't remember all of them, but the one that stuck in my mind was self-organizing teams. We can't allow people to self-organize. So it's not, the principles aren't something that you can pick and choose, the ones that you like and the ones that you want to adopt. And that's kind of a theme that we'll see later as well. Now, in terms of specific Agile practices or methodologies, I think methodologies might be the wrong word, it really boils down to 2 big ones. There's Scrum and there's Kanban. And that data comes from the 15th annual State of Agile report. An organization called Version 1 does this survey every year. And the results haven't changed much. Between Scrum, Scrumban, and the Scrum and XP, or Extreme Programming blend, that accounts for about 81%. And then Kanban is another 15%. There's other methods like extreme programming or DSDM is popular. It's still popular in Europe, but they're all really dwarfed by these 2 practices. These are the ways that people implement those Agile principles. But those practices alone aren't Agile. They're just a framework for adopting Agile. So let's look now at why organizations pursue agility. So some of the big key drivers for business agility would include dealing with VUCA. And VUCA is a word that represents the risk in our current business context. Adam spoke at length about risk management in his presentation earlier today, but VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Increasingly, that's what we're dealing with in businesses today. Second is increased global competitiveness. This global competitiveness puts pressure on maintaining existing products, but also simultaneously launching new products. And it's a real thing, even for a very small training organization like my own. Prior to 2020, we were focused on the Chicago market, and we did very well. We were very well known in Chicago, and most of our clients were based out of Chicago. Once the pandemic hit and remote work became a reality for everybody, well, now our competition is everywhere. It's not just people that are in Chicago, but it's anybody who wants to offer a class at any time of the day, or anybody who can support coaching Agile teams remotely during central US business hours. So increasingly, we're seeing competition from the East Coast of the United States, from the West Coast of the United States, from Europe, from India, from the Philippines, and just about everywhere. So we're truly in a global environment. Even as a very small organization, I'm feeling the pressure of global competitiveness. And that affects not only what we offer, but also the price of what we offer, because sometimes people live in areas that are less expensive than Chicago, Illinois, for example. The third reason for pursuing agility is long-term viability. And that directly relates to the prior item on competitiveness. If you're not competitive, you're not going to be in business very long. And increasingly, we're seeing that company lifespans are shrinking. This is a chart that shows the average lifespan of companies on the Standard & Poor's 500 index. In 2020, the average age was 21 years, and that's down from 32 years and 65. But if you look at the trend from 2021 on, this forecast, they're really looking at it getting shorter and shorter as more younger companies displace older companies. Now, some examples of this that you're probably familiar with. Borders Bookstore was 40 years old when it went out of business. And in 2011, it was displaced by Amazon that was 17 years old at that time. Or Blockbuster Video was 28 years old when it went out of business in 2013, and it was displaced by Netflix, which was only 16 years old. So what we're seeing are organizations are not around as long because of that competitive threat. And I don't want to make this all doom and gloom. I'm just saying it's a reality, this competitiveness and longevity. So which organizations are going to persist and succeed? Interestingly, I found this in the 2018 Pulse of the Profession from PMI. They believe that those organizations that are going to succeed are those that are able to adapt rapidly to new opportunities and challenges. That sounds an awful lot like Agile ways of working, right? They have that quick, ready availability to move. So some of the types of opportunities and challenges that we're going to see fall into these three buckets: increased customer expectations, disruptive technologies, and black swan events. So let's start with increased customer expectations. And the picture here is from a Starbucks, actually the line at a Starbucks. I'm a big fan of Starbucks. I don't know how many other people are, but if I go to a Starbucks and I wait in line, and how long would I have to wait in line before I become impatient? Well, think about it for yourself. At what point do you get impatient with the length of the line? For me, it's probably about a minute. And after a minute, I begin looking around, like, what are all the people in this store doing? And why are there 7 people back there behind the counter? Why are so many people tending to the mobile orders? And what I realize, if I'm somewhat self-aware, is that I think I'm pretty important, and I don't want to wait more than a minute for a Starbucks. Like, what the heck? What kind of country are we living in here? So my expectations are to be served quickly with a Starbucks. And I think that holds for many people. And it's not just Starbucks. Think about Amazon. When Amazon came out with Amazon Prime and overnight delivery, it was revolutionary. Those of us that are old probably remember Sears and Roebuck. We had a Sears and Roebuck catalog at our house. It was about this thick. And we would thumb through it, and if we wanted something, we would order it. It would get delivered to a nearby Sears store, and my mom would go pick it up for us. So probably 2 to 3 weeks would not be unfair expectation. But now Amazon delivering overnight, and in some cities, they deliver the same day. So I have many supplies from Amazon I can get the same day. Talk about customer expectations. Similarly, like watching a movie. So a long time ago, and I hate to say that because it makes me sound old, but you'd have to go to a theater and you'd choose from one of the 2 available movie options that they had. Today, you've got an unlimited choice of movies on all these different streaming services, and they're available instantly. So customer expectations are increasing, and customers are not very tolerant of having to wait. The second category there are disruptive technologies. And we already talked about Netflix and displacing Blockbuster, Amazon displacing Borders Books. But think about an organization like Kodak, who was so dominant in the photography industry, but simply got wiped out because they didn't master digital photography. And they've bounced in and out of bankruptcy. I think they're a shell of the organization that they were 20 years ago, because they missed this disruptive technology. The third category are black swan events. Now, you might think that these things never happen, but they do happen, unfortunately. The picture here is somebody with a mask on, kind of representing the global pandemic of 2020. You could say nobody saw this coming, but there were people that saw it coming, but not that many. The 2008 financial crisis, another black swan event that came out of nowhere and affected everybody. Or more recently, in 2022, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So while in Chicago, I'm not directly impacted, but I did see rising prices, fuel cost issues. There's going to be food issues and taxation issues. I mean, there's a long list of implications that come out of this black swan event. So let's look at some tools now that help us decide what approach to use for organizational work and consider these opportunities and challenges in light of those tools. So one tool that is commonly used is the Stacy complexity model. So I don't know if you've heard of this or not. This particular version of the diagram comes from a Forrester research report, but PMI also included it. I have this Agile practice guide from PMI. I don't know how many people have it, but they also included the Stacy diagram in here as a way to choose the appropriate approach based on the context that you're working in. So the way to read the Stacy complexity diagram is on the vertical axis, you have requirements, and the lower side is requirements are close to alignment or close to understanding, and on the top is far from alignment or far from understanding. So this is the what we need to build. And then on the horizontal axis, we have technology, close to certainty versus far from certainty. And this is how we're going to build it. So what we need to build and how we're going to build it. And that forms, or that allows us to break this down into 4 different domains: simple, complicated, complex, and chaos. Some people draw this diagram slightly different. It doesn't really matter for purposes of our discussion, but so we could think of those 3 opportunities and challenges that I mentioned earlier as affecting these 3 areas of the Stacy diagram. So in terms of requirements, when we have increased customer expectation, that affects our requirements or what we need to build. Disruptive technologies affects how we're going to build it or how we're going to deliver that solution. And then the black swan events apply to this chaos domain. So if we think about the simple domain, so we've got requirements that are close to alignment or well understood, and we've got technology that's close to certainty. So we know what to build and we know how to build it. Well, in that case, simple or traditional waterfall ways of working work very well. Plans are effective. We plan things out and then we execute them, typically in a linear form. And because there's not a lot of uncertainty or change, this can work really well. A lot of projects are still done this way today, but a lot historically have been done this way. When we move into the complicated and complex domains, then they recommend using agile ways of working. Again, the requirements are more likely to be variable or changing, and the technology that we use can be less certain and also changing, or maybe the team needs to figure out the best technology. So in these cases, agile ways of working, Scrum or Kanban, will work very well. What about chaos? So in the chaos domain, there's actually not any approach that works excellent. Like everything's sure to fail. Like it's just, you know, we don't know what we need to build and we don't know how to build it. What could be more troublesome than that? In that case, we can think about those black swan events as helping us to build organizational resiliency. So the idea of resiliency has been around for a while. Nassim Taleb, in his book, Anti-Fragile, he also wrote another book, Black Swan. He talks about stressors on organization and how organizations can get stronger by being stressed. And he uses the analogy of strength training, human beings doing strength training, like working out with weights. By stressing our bodies actually get stronger. And some organizations have applied these concepts to their organization as well. This is another item that Andy mentioned earlier today, although I'm not sure everybody caught it, Chaos Monkey being introduced at Netflix. So Chaos Monkey was a tool that was created by a team at Netflix, and their charter was to bring disruption to their online systems so that the teams that were responsible for uptime and resiliency could respond. So essentially, they unleashed these programs called Chaos Monkey, which would bring the system down. They would purposefully terminate instances in a cluster and do other things to basically impede the availability of the system. They didn't do this as a stress test in off hours. They did this during normal business hours in an attempt to force the team responsible for uptime to respond to these unpredictable downtime instances. Now, believe it or not, Chaos Monkey was so effective at what it did that they created a whole simian army at Netflix. So not only did they have Chaos Monkey, they created Chaos Gorilla, which would bring the outage of an entire availability zone, or Chaos Kong, which would drop a full Amazon Web Services region. And then they created a whole bunch of other monkeys that would help with cleanup and other things. And I just thought this was so incredibly impressive to help prepare our organization or their organization to be resilient and to have predictable uptime, that they would introduce unpredictability. And if you're a Netflix user, you've probably experienced an incredibly high amount of uptime. I don't know if I've ever seen downtime at Netflix or ever had something error out or just, you know, a spinning monitor or something. So that's the complexity, Stacy complexity model. And that's somewhat helpful in figuring out which approach to use, but I think it's a little bit inadequate. I think it doesn't really go far enough in terms of helping organizations prepare and improve their business agility. So let's take another view. In 2021, Kareem Harbat published this book, The 6 Enablers of Business Agility. And I was already familiar somewhat with Kareem Harbat and reading his work. It really forced me to realize that choosing a project approach based on the domain is somewhat short-sighted. And the reason for that is because to have true business agility, it means rethinking the organization top to bottom. It's not just a matter of, okay, right now we're going to use Agile, and on the next one, we're going to use waterfall. It's really about rethinking the nature of our work and restructuring our organization. So those 6 enablers of business agility are outlined here. I'm not going to go through all of them for you, but or I'm not going to go in detail on them. I'll just explain each one. Leaders and managers, they need to understand and actively engage and support agile ways of working. Culture could be thought of as the behaviors that are rewarded or punished in an organization. And if you don't change the culture, you're not going to change the behaviors in the organization. Then there's organizational structure. Most or many organizations have a very top-down hierarchy with functional silos. And that's going to be less agile or provide less support for agile ways of working than an organization that is aligned by customers or products. Then there's people and engagement. How do we go about recruiting, retaining, and investing in our people and developing them? Number 5 is governance and funding. So thinking about things like annual budgeting cycles that create these large fixed engagements, typically 6 months prior to the start of the year. Like many organizations now are locking in their budgets for next year. So the amount of money they're going to spend, the results they expect to deliver with that money, and locking it in now a full 6 months before the year begins and significantly in advance of when they're going to do the work. So imagine in a context of constant change and competitiveness, how ineffective that annual planning cycle could be. It also encourages things like use it or lose it spending, where toward the end of the year, and we'll see this in many organizations, they have money that they know if they don't spend it, they won't get the money next year. So it encourages them to spend money that they don't necessarily need to spend. And the final enabler is ways of working. Kareem intentionally put ways of working last because this is unfortunately where most organizations begin. They start here and they don't actually consider any of these other aspects. They just introduce agile ways of working, like, hey, let's set up a Scrum team. But a Scrum team isn't going to thrive in an organization that is set up to facilitate those traditional predictive approaches. So agile ways of working just aren't going to thrive there. It's like planting, getting plants to grow in toxic soil. It's just not going to happen. But the key aspect of this book that I want to bring to light is the idea of breaking work down into either exploit or explore. These are two categories that Kareem says all organizational activity falls within. And we can look at Amazon as a good, or as to provide an example for this. Exploit work is that work that we do to support existing or maintain existing products. So a good example here would be building a new warehouse at Amazon. So it's basically supporting existing product lines. The goals might be, reducing cost, improving efficiencies, or maintaining market share. Explore work, on the other hand, is identifying new businesses or new business models. And the example here is Amazon Pharmacy, which was, I think, launched earlier this year, maybe a couple of months ago. But it's just one example from Amazon. There's a lot. Amazon Web Services is another great example. It was a whole new business model. So the keys of explore work are to innovate, to create new business models, and to delight customers. So fundamentally, different types of work with different goals. So when we're looking at exploit work, some of the characteristics are that it's predictable. So plans are effective, probably using traditional project management approaches. It's also repeatable. So systems can help us to keep costs down, and we can leverage best practices like, hey, this is what works. Published playbooks work really well here. The rate of change is low, and we might have known knowns and known unknowns. So there's things that we know that we don't know. What works well here in the exploit approach are the annual budgets that I just talked about and I dogged. Also, what works well are those hierarchies, strict chains of command for decision-making. The project paradigm, driving to a known result based on the triple constraint, on time, on budget, on scope, and assigning and holding project managers accountable to deliver the project. That all works great when we're talking about exploit work. But when we're looking at explore work, it's different. So explore work is unpredictable. So having detailed planning up front would be very wasteful. Like the time that we spend on creating a detailed plan would be mostly throwaway. The rate of change is very high, and it's characterized by things that we know we don't know, and then things that we don't even know that we don't know yet, the unknown unknowns. So what works here? Well, what works here in terms of funding is making many small bets. It's sometimes called the venture capital model. It's like start a bunch of small initiatives and only increase funding if the payback seems likely. Organizing around small self-managing teams. So putting decision-making for the teams closest to where the information is. That allows them to go faster and make better decisions. Also to be able to embrace uncertainty and expect failure, eliminate blame. You can't have innovation without a tolerance for failure. And in most organizations, in my experience, I see this is the biggest hindrance. They have a culture of blame, and they're not able to accommodate a lot of experimentation. Or they don't have that mindset that, hey, some things are going to have to fail in order for things to succeed. And in terms of the hierarchy, networks work better in this explorer approach. So a network is people being able to and being connected to other like-minded individuals within the organization without working through a hierarchy. So anybody can talk to anybody. And this has been around for a while. This is not a new concept, but like Gore and company, the creators of Gore-Tex, have leveraged networks forever and eliminated hierarchies. So we could think about these two approaches as parts of the product development lifecycle. Now, I'm showing it here as linear. Randy England yesterday showed it as a cycle, which I think is more accurate, but this is a very simple version. So in terms of the life cycle, we've got search and develop, sustain, and retire. So search and develop are parts of the explore activity, and sustain and retire are part of the exploit activity. So as we move forward, explore, well, if we think about risk across this, risk and uncertainty is highest at the beginning, and it tends to decrease. And our spending or our funding tends to start low and then increase as we see opportunities for payback and return on investment. And then eventually it tapers off. So hopefully these two approaches make sense. And I think I think we'll skip the second poll. I'm not sure that I think we'll run out of time if we do the second poll. So I do have a warning or a caution here about avoiding hybrid approaches. What I see happening in the marketplace is a lot of people, they want to be agile. They want those benefits of business agility. They're facing competition, but they are encumbered by their existing structures. So they want to use a hybrid approach as a way of stepping into agility. And hybrid in this case, definition of hybrid is mixed character composed of mixed parts. If we look at some typical hybrids, we've got Harry Potter. Harry is a hybrid. He's called a muggle, right? He's half wizard and half human being. Or the Toyota Prius is a hybrid, like it's a fossil fuel car and it's also an electric car. Or we have the mule. The mule is a hybrid of the donkey and the horse. So the idea of the hybrid is to bring the strengths of each of those. Now, there was a survey done by PMI in their Pulse of the Profession from 2018. They showed when surveyed, organizations said 47% of them said they use a waterfall or predictive approach. 23% said they use agile or adaptive, and 23% said they use a hybrid approach, with 7 using something else. So in this case, hybrid means they're mixing agile and waterfall. This is what I really want to caution you against, because I think this is really kind of a slippery slope that is costly and doesn't provide the benefits. So a typical hybrid approach is what you might call water scrum or fall, or water scrum fall. I see a lot of variations of this. So waterfall in the life cycle means approval and planning is handled in a waterfall way. Scrum is used during development and testing, and then waterfall is used again for integration and deployment. A great example of this and a really entertaining presentation was done by Jonathan Smart. I think it's in 2017. He talked about his experience at Barclays, and it's a great video. I highly recommend it. But if we looked at the life cycle that they had for development then, it was characterized by waterfall with a small development cycle, which was Scrum, and then waterfall again at the end. This took, I think, 18 to 24 months in its entirety from the idea, or from the point where they had an idea to when it was delivered in production. And ironically, there's all this wait time where things are sitting around and nothing is happening. But he noted when it gets to development, everybody's like, hey, how come it's taking so long? How comes the Scrum team's not moving faster? You know, this was actually 2 to 3 months once it hit development. But the rest of the cycle was, 20 months worth of waiting around for things to happen. So water scrum or fall, or whatever you want to call it, is not very effective, like using a blend in this way. The other blend that I see happening quite frequently, which just I find both saddening and also frustrating, is what I would call the Agile pixie dust approach. This is where we sprinkle in some new terminology into our existing environment, like, hey, let's have a daily stand-up, or let's introduce sprints. This is a good one. We'll have a design sprint, we'll have a development sprint, we'll have a testing sprint, and then we'll have a release sprint, which sounds a lot like waterfall, if you ask me. Or let's just rename all the project managers in the organization Scrum Masters. Or, hey, let's start a Scrum of Scrum. So they're basically sprinkling in terminology. It's counterproductive. It would be as if you put solar panels on the top of your Hummer and you called it green. Hey, this is good for the environment now because I've got the solar panels on there. Or let's say you put calcium and vitamin C in your chewing tobacco. I mean, is it helpful? Well, I mean, maybe it is, Or maybe you put Febreze on your spent nuclear fuel, to make it smell better. That's about how effective this sprinkling of the pixie dust is. And that's why I want to try to discourage organizations from taking those approaches. They give the illusion of benefit, but they don't really help. So the bottom line, those approaches aren't very agile. The blended approaches actually can be more heavyweight than either predictive or agile alone. I've seen that by adding the overhead of the Scrum framework, which generally includes a lot of meetings. If you add that onto an existing organization that already has a lot of meetings, your workers are going to be spending all their time in meetings talking about the work that doesn't get done because they're in meetings all day. Secondly, there's marginal benefits over predictive alone. You might as well just use the waterfall approach and not try to add anything in there. It also doesn't benefit in terms of organizational agility, the ability to respond to change or meet those customer needs or leverage disruptive technologies. They're also ineffective as an agile adoption strategy. So I sometimes hear that argument is like, well, this is our way of learning how to use agile and we're going to move toward agile ways of working from here. Actually, you can't get there from here. You almost need to start with a blank piece of paper. But most importantly, they don't support innovation and long-term organizational viability. So the key takeaways here: use the best approach for your context and your goals, avoid those half measures, and maximize learning. So thinking about the work of your organization, either falling into the exploit category or the explore category. Either it's maintaining existing products or developing those new products. Secondly, avoid those half measures. Don't keep mixing and matching, especially if you're not a master of either of those. So don't just arbitrarily sprinkle that pixie dust on or mix the two and create a water scrum or fall Frankenstein. And then finally, maximize the learning. And this kind of goes back to something, I think it was John McKean that mentioned this yesterday, or John Bleakney, I'm sorry, mentioned the learning capacity of an organization. Like, this is the key. So we need to maximize learning for all parts of the organization, team members, project managers, and leaders. So this means mastering the Agile principles, adopting an Agile mindset, and learning to lead effectively in an Agile context. A lot of people believe that they understand Agile ways of working, and sometimes they oversimplify, and they actually have a hard time understanding because of their current paradigm and the way that they've been working. I went through that myself as a longtime project manager. I had a hard time imagining a self-managing team, how that would work. And it wasn't until I had firsthand experience as a participant in a self-managing team that it really, the light bulb went off for me. They don't need someone directing them to do their tasks. They don't need someone checking up on them. And I see this light bulb go off in many organizations where I'm going in and doing training. A CIO at a large organization, global organization, participated in one of my workshops where we do an airplane exercise. And it basically forces people to think about the linear nature of work and self-managing teams. And the next morning he came in, he goes, I couldn't stop thinking about that exercise. And I can't believe that I never thought people could self-manage in the past. So it was very, very much an eye-opener. And learning is super important. If we think about some of the barriers, the significant barriers to adopting Agile, and this comes from the 15th Annual State of Agile report, the top reasons or top barriers for Agile adoption are inconsistent processes and practices. So this directly relates to training, organizational culture at odds with Agile values. So like I said, you can't plant a new plant and expect it to grow in toxic soil. The general organization resistance to change. So we need effective change management programs that include training as part of an element of that. Lack of skills and experience with Agile methods, that's training. Not enough leadership participation. So it's not enough for leaders to say, hey, go be Agile. Or one of the CIOs, this is a few years ago in the Chicago market, he said at the beginning of the year, he's like, by the end of this year, I want 50% of our projects to be Agile projects, without any context for what that meant and without any support for training around Agile. It's like, just go be Agile by dictate. The next one, inadequate management support and sponsorship. This is not going to work unless managers are on board. And then, finally, insufficient training and education. So with that, I'd like to pause here and open it up for questions. Hopefully you found this interesting, and I'd be happy to take your questions at this time.
Thank you very much, Anthony. This is such a wonderful presentation. I like your idea of exploration and exploitation. This is something a lot of people are talking about right now as organizational ambidexterity, or to be able to exploit and explore at the same time. And when they can balance these two, that's when they're going to be competitive. Your presentation is actually very relevant. Some of our presenters this morning talk about business resilience, right? And I believe enterprise agility is actually related to that, and I believe you mentioned that too. So thank you very much for such a great presentation. I think we have some questions in the chat here. We have questions from Al. Do you see any effective way to use Agile in a strictly hardware development environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Al. And I'm not, I don't have firsthand experience with hardware development, but I know there's a lot of organizations that are using it in hardware development. There's an organization in Chicago called Chamberlain. They make garage door openers, among other things. And they've been using these methods for over 10 years. Tesla uses Scrum. The Saab fighter jet program uses Scrum. I don't personally do it, so I can't speak to it. Most of my experience is within software development or even in business processes, but I understand it is happening in hardware as well.
Thank you. And Paul here has a comment. Paul, it's actually a question. So what would you advise a professional PM who uses the traditional waterfall methodology to execute project in light of the global competitiveness in the era? Would you advise the PM to get a Scrum Master certification?
Yeah, great question, Paul. I would say yes, of course. But I think the Scrum Master certification alone doesn't go far enough. I would actually encourage you to go be a participant on a Scrum team, because the Scrum Master certification is it's good training, but it's 2 classroom days and then an easy test, and you can get certified without really changing your world belief. Because most project managers, and I do this as well, we interpret things through our project management lens and experience. The more experience we have as a project manager, the more we tend to see things through that lens. And so we hear about the Scrum Master role, we think, great, it's a project manager. It's actually not a project manager. Scrum Master and a project manager have very different skills. So I would encourage project managers to take that Scrum Master training, but go get firsthand experience. You'll have a harder time fully embracing and internalizing those principles until you've lived it. So sorry, that's not an easy answer, but unfortunately we have to unlearn some of the things that we think we know about organizations and about team behavior.
Great. And Adele, who's one of our co-chairs here for the conference, I think has questions. I have found that organizations use Agile without knowing its true benefits for productivity and training, education, team, as well as culture change. Do you think the effect of this will be felt by employees in the software development team, for instance, in terms of job stress, job engagement, and psychological safety?
Yeah, that's a great point. There's actually some debate, and you can find this out on the internet around what's called weaponizing Agile or weaponized Scrum. Ron Jeffries has a post out there about dark Scrum. And it's the idea that organizations leverage what they call Scrum, but they really just do it as a way to monitor employees more closely. So they leverage the transparency that comes with the Scrum framework and short sprints to basically monitor people more closely. And it actually creates more stress because there's more transparency and more pressure to deliver. And it's again, it goes back to those Agile principles. It's not about empowering and trusting people. It's really about keeping a closer eye on them. So if you look at Scrum as just another project management tool that we can keep tabs on people, then yes, you're going to have high stress, you're going to have low engagement and low psychological safety.
Wonderful. And we do have a lot of praises here for your presentation in this chat as well. And Doug, who's one of our faculty in Toronto, has a question. It appears that most of your Agile examples involve project to develop software applications. What about adopting Agile in projects that have physical deliverables? Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, as I mentioned, my experience is largely around software development applications or IT related applications. It does have applications in many other areas. I know in education, they use the Scrum framework. So I think there are plenty of applications out there. I think the reason it's so popular in software development is there was a lot of opportunity because it was painful and costly to develop software. It's such a good fit for software development where there's so much uncertainty. But yes, increasingly it's being rolled out across organizations. I mean, even a very simple thing, my kids, because they've seen me using it, I see them creating Kanban boards for their homework, not started, in progress, and done. So like the principles are not rocket science. And if they're a helpful way to deliver on your physical deliverables, please use those.
Thank you. And Sriram, another co-chairs, great presentation, Anthony, he said. What are your experiences in implementing contracts like procurement involving fixed price or cost reimbursable in an agile context?
Well, Sriram and I go way back. I've known him for a long time and he's awesome. So I think he's trying to throw me a softball here. But I think the best practices are to educate your procurement organization and make sure your contractual documents are aligned to agile ways of working. So a good example of this is if you're going to use sprints, make sure you understand what's expected from the sprints. Is there a product backlog? Who's going to prioritize the product backlog? Great example, earlier this year, I was involved in a lawsuit with a consultant or a vendor organization that was building a solution for a client. The client, the agreement was that they would produce an MVP or a minimum viable product. And they should never have used that word because it's very ambiguous. But it basically was settled out of court, but I was the Agile expert brought in and on the part of the vendor. And the main reason for the lawsuit was that the contractual paperwork did not align with agile ways of working. So it didn't explain what would be delivered, how it would be delivered, like over the course of the sprints, who would prioritize the backlog, and what did it mean in terms of delivery of those backlog items. So even if it's fixed price, there should be an agreement and an alignment with the procurement agency. And in many cases, purchasing just needs some help with what are the agile basics, because they're often going into it with a fixed price, fixed cost mindset, or in your case, the fixed cost reimbursable. So we need to help our procurement specialists to understand agile ways of working.
Wonderful. And we have a question from Karen White. How does one estimate an agile project approach when operating in a fixed budget environment? In other words, before a business case is approved, the CFO wants to know the estimated cost.
That's a great question. Well, the difficulty is that people want certainty. So they want to know exactly what it's going to take before you have any information. So if we think about, if we go back to the slide where it showed risk being highest when there's the most uncertainty, if you're asking for a price when there's very little information known, then the best you should expect is a range. There's a concept that's been around for a long time called the cone of uncertainty, showing that the estimates early on in a project lifecycle can be as much as 400% higher than the estimate, or the estimate, or it could be 1/4 of the price. So 4 times too high or 1/4 too low. So we don't really have a lot of information, and it might be that we need to educate the CFO, and we might also have to encourage them to take that explore approach of running some small experiments, making some small investments, and then if they pan out, investing more money. So rather than this is the one thing we're going to budget for the year, have it be 10 things that you're going to budget and cut them off as soon as they show that they're not going to provide payback. Hopefully that helps, Karen.
Wonderful. And Karen has a follow-up questions, I believe. Do you foresee a day when software development approaches would be separated from management of a software development project? That is, the 5 phases of PM do not translate into requirement analysis, system design, coding, testing, release, etc.
To my mind, that's already happened. Like that would be old-fashioned thinking because of in a sprint, you're doing requirements analysis, design, coding, testing, and release. And that could be in as short of a 1-week sprint or a 2-week sprint. So I think separating those activities and thinking about them linearly as phases, I think is a disservice. It's better to just think about a sprint is going to take things from not started to done.
Okay. So can you think about a release as a phase, like where you collect requirements, design, etc.?
I would think of a release as a series of sprints, and maybe even one sprint. Like I have teams that release at the end of a 2-week sprint. Every 2 weeks, they're pushing something out. It's called continuous delivery. I think Randy England also spoke to this yesterday.
Yeah. And in a release, you can have many sprints, right? You
could have one sprint or you could have many sprints, yes.
Okay. And can you think of a sprint as a in terms of life cycle, something you design, develop, test, etc.?
You can, but I would encourage you, like, again, we're thinking through the project management lens, the linear sequential, we're pushing Agile into that lens. I would step back and think it's more about let's get a team together and build things in short cycles and let go of or transcend the idea of those sequence or phases.
So in this point, and I believe Adam Sandman gave a fantastic presentation today, talk about how to take risks, right, into consideration throughout the life of the project, but from sprint to sprint, right? So in a sprint, you can take and analyze and see what risks might be involved in there, right?
Yes. I think, though, it's more organic. So yes, again, we're looking at risk management through our traditional project management lens, but there's also like, hey, I'm trying to get this item done and, we've encountered this risk. So you can apply those techniques, but it tends to be more organic. We can look at the product backlog and say, this item coming up has risk. Let's make sure we move that to the top of the backlog and attack that first. Or let's use a spike. I think that might have been one of the suggested techniques. Let's use a spike to learn more and reduce risk of this item.
Thank you.
But accumulating those in a spreadsheet and doing the risk exposure calculations is often, I find it counterproductive. I've done a lot of those, but I just think it's simpler than that. I think it's more of a paper exercise and project managers potentially doing work that fills the time available rather than what's most valuable to the organization.
Thank you very much, Anthony. It was such a good presentations and wonderful discussions. There's a lot of questions people were asking, and you come here and answer in such beautiful way. Thank you very much. So we're going to take a break, 15 minutes, and we will be back at 3:30. Thank you very much.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony. Really appreciated you coming and joining us for this. This was a big event for the team, but obviously for the university as well. It's our first one, and hope to do more after this on an annual basis. But we tested the waters and been planning on this for I think about 3 or 4 or 5 years now. We've been talking about it. Now we finally actually got involved and did something. But the point is that having presentations like yours are priceless. They really are. And you've seen some of the other ones, and yours was right up there with them. Just fantastic. And this is exactly, I think, what our audience has been asking for and looks for. And I just can't say enough about your participation. I will have a little talk with Sriram. He's a friend of mine as well. I will talk to him about throwing softballs and making sure that he doesn't throw the easy questions out next time. But anyway, no, I'm just kidding about that. But Sriram's a great guy, and he's been involved in this whole process with us, and I'm glad you know him. Sounds like you have a good relationship with him.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Les.
great presentation. Sriam is certainly wonderful. So
Anthony.
the next presentation is going to be at 3:30, and enjoy your break, and we look forward to seeing you.
Jacques, I think Shauna is here. I see her. She is visible, very nice.